I'm going to start recording it now. Welcome. Thank you so much for investing your time in your professional development to join us today. We have a webinar presented today by Professor Taberski, and it's on writing effective IEP goals. This is sponsored by the Schools First Federal Credit Union and the Center for Creativity and Critical Thinking here in the College of Education. And we are just so excited to present these webinars to you. We have several more planned for the rest of the semester. So at the end, I'm going to pop back on and beg you to take a survey. That helps ensure that we continue to get sponsored so that we can continue to offer you these webinars and this professional development for free. So at the very end, I'll come back on with a link for a really quick survey for you to take, and then I will let you know about the next webinar. So I'll go ahead and mute myself, and you can take it away, Professor Taberski.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. Hey, everybody, thanks for coming. I recognize a lot of your names, and I'm so happy to see some familiar faces. In the chat box, I did put a link to a PDF of the PowerPoint, so if you want to fast forward or reverse, feel free to. I know sometimes I like to do that when I'm listening to a seminar. It kind of helps you to digest information. As it says on this first slide, you can jump in at any time if you have a question. I think there's maybe 25 of us, so it's not a big group. If you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can post a question in the chat. Just sometimes the chat, if you've ever hosted a webinar, when you click on the chat, sometimes it disappears and then it makes you crazy because you're like, somebody has a question and I don't know what it is. So we're going to talk about IEP goals, which is really important to our job, right? When you're a special education teacher, you are expected to write really effective, strong IEP goals. You might hear, administrators say that your goals have to be legally defensible. So we're going to talk a little bit about the legal reasons why we write goals the way that we do, and then we'll go through how we prep, some virtual strategies, what are those different parts of the goals, and we'll look at a little sample, and then we'll check on just some more basic information about IEP goals that I want you guys to really know, okay? So in IDEA, which is our #1 law for all of our special education students, the law tells us that the reason that we have to include these measurable annual goals, and we have to think about academics and functional goals. So you guys might already know this, but some of those functional goals can be social emotional, they can be adaptive skills, right? If you have students that need assistance or they need to learn how to do some of those daily living skills. Our students can have motor skills goals or communication goals. There's a lot of different areas that fall under functional. So keep in mind, it's not just about reading, writing, math, but there's other things that embody kind of that full curriculum for a student. And then also that we have to be able to write goals that will meet their needs. So keep in mind, goals are not written to strengths. Goals are written to needs. And the reason why we do this is because we want the child to be able to make progress in the general education curriculum and meet the needs of the student. At the very bottom, there's this other paragraph, and this is also from IDEA. And what this is telling us is the other thing we have to keep in mind as teachers is that we have to measure progress on these goals. And then we have to report that progress to the parents, and it has to be concurrent with issuance of report cards. So you might hear your principal or your administrator say that you have to track enough progress that you can be able to report it at the trimester or the quarter or semester, however you are reporting progress to general education students. Now, most recently, there was a Supreme Court decision that was decided just 4 years ago by the Supreme Court, and it was the most recent issue that's special education. And there was a case that was in Colorado, and it's Andrew F. is what we commonly refer to the case as. And in this case, the parents filed a lawsuit against the district in Colorado their son was in because they had documentation, right? They had all this proof of kindergarten to 4th grade. that they had their child on an IEP and they were following up with all of the recommendations from the district, and the district had recommended for the child to be with these goals and in this SDC classroom, and the child Andrew had a diagnosis of autism. And the parents felt year after year after year that their child was just making minimal progress. So what that means is, as you're the teacher and you're writing these goals and you say, well, let's see, Andrew can identify 10 out of 26 alphabet letters. So next year, we're going to work to 15. And then the next year after that, we're going to work to 20. And then the next year after that to 26. And it sounds like Andrew's making progress, right? He's making these little minimal steps. But meanwhile, you have a student that went from kindergarten to 4th grade and never learned how to read words, right? So it's not just about our students need to make progress from year to year, but that they need to make progress in light of their circumstances. And then circumstances means careful consideration of the child's present levels, disability, and potential for growth. And the thing that the Supreme Court understands is the individualized part of IEPs, is that not every child is going to make progress at the same rate, but you cannot write goals that are such minimal progress that you can sit back and say, oh, they met their goal. You need to show that you have taken into consideration what their ability to make progress is. So it's really important for us to think about this, because most likely in a district, you might hear someone talk about the NJRF case and why it's important that we write rigorous goals. So when you're getting ready and you have a student and you're going to work on their goals, and obviously some of you, if you're in student teaching, you may or may not have started this process. Oh wait, student teaching doesn't start until March 1st, right? Next week. But some of you might already be working with your master teacher if you've had a chance to meet them. Maybe you've gotten some student profiles to work on. So the most important thing when you prepare to write your goals is to review the progress on their current goals, right? So you have your student, they have goals, and you're going to be tracking progress and data on how are they meeting those goals. Have they already met them? Are they partially met? Under what circumstances? Because sometimes you might have a student that you have moved in from another district or another state. And when you read the goal, maybe the person that wrote it left out the prompting, right? Because the student can do it for you, but it's like with verbal prompting or with a model. So there's some variance within that when you're going to be tracking your progress on the goals. The other thing that you have to look at, so not just their current goals, but you need to look at previous IEPs, because that's how you'll understand their rate of progress. As a practitioner, if you sit down at an IEP meeting and the parent says, why are you making this assumption that my child would only gain, X amount of progress within the next year? The thing you need to say is, because I have read the previous IEPs and I can see what their rate of progress is. And we want to increase that, right? You're not going to write a goal at the same rate of progress. You're going to kind of encourage some growth, but you don't want to be so far off, really much lower or really much higher. You want to be pushing the child to make growth, but within what's a reasonable expectation based on their history. Some of the other things that you're going to want to look at are any current assessment reports. So if they had a triennial done recently, maybe it's within the first couple of years the child is on an IEP, so there might be an initial assessment report. And then also any state testing, your curriculum testing that just is happening as you are teaching within your lesson planning, or any district testing. And then you also want to make sure that you interview the parents. This is very important. Any of you that have had me in a class, you know how much I preach parent participation. It's one of the main 6 tenets of IDEA. You have to interview the parents. I don't care if it's by phone or by email or over a Zoom or a Google Meet. You need to make sure that you get some information from them on what are their concerns for the child, what do they feel the child needs to work on in relation to their educational and school progress, and what progress the parent has seen on some of those current goals. So you also want to remind the parent, like, here's the current goals your child's been working on. And you can even share with them, here's the data that I'm seeing. This is the progress that I'm seeing. And this is what I think the next year's goals should be. That's the conversation you want to have a good 30 days before the IEP meeting. You know, don't wait and call them the day before the meeting, because you want to get their input with enough time that if you need to trial other skills with the student to get some baseline data, you have time to do that. And then other therapists working with the student. So that might be within the school district, speech therapist, occupational therapist, especially if you're working on a writing goal or listening and speaking goals. And then also the aides that work in the classroom. So they spend a lot of time with our students. They see them and how they participate. So always, always reach out to all of these other people within the periphery or on the team for this student. And then the final step is to also talk with the student themselves. You know, obviously this might depend on the communication level of the student, but as much as you can, and honestly, you know, I believe in presuming competence. You should have these conversations with the student of asking them, what do you feel they struggle with, or what are they really good at? You know, also to include in your present levels, the statement of a student's strengths or interests. You should have these conversations with the child and make sure that you are communicating with them as much as you can about the IEP that you're writing for them and the goals, and that you want their input because you want them to be involved in making this plan. So once you have all of that, you also basically have gathered a lot of the information you need to write your present levels, that PLAAFP, present levels of academic and functional performance. So this is all kind of a big process, and I have this title of preparing to write IEP goals, but really this is all the information that you need to gather just to write the IEP. Does anybody have any questions so far? Good. I lost my cursor. There's my mouse. Okay. So the other thing that is of most importance, and this is also from our law, is that you need to be able to correlate these goals to grade level standards. And the most important caution is that you do not go above or below the student's grade level. So remember at the beginning I said IEP goals are written to needs. So if you have a student that has a strength and they are at grade level, you know, maybe in their, you know, reading skills or their phonics skills are at grade level, you are not going to write them a goal to go to the next grade level up. We assume that the student will continue to make progress and stay within the natural range of growth for that area. We write goals to deficits or areas of need. And again, I just put in a quote here from the US Department of Education, and this was recent, right? This is just 6 years ago. And as we know, IDEA has been around for a long time, and yet still they're coming out and reminding us that these have to be written for the grade in which the child is enrolled. And then I did put a couple links here. So one is to the Common Core State Standards, which is what we follow for California, as well as resources. If you click on this link, it'll take you to the California Department of Ed website and give you resources on writing goals and working with the Common Core. And then also for any students in here that are ECSE and you're working with students that are between the ages of 3 and 6, the California Preschool Learning Foundations are linked here, which you probably already know. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the distance learning strategies, because whether you might already be back in the classroom and able to document this, some districts are still virtual and some districts are hybrid. And considering the current state of our world, you know, in the event a year from now or 5 years from now, we all go virtual again, it's good for us to just have these strategies ready. So keep in mind, if you are doing group sessions online with students, the things that you need to monitor, right, is that on-task behaviors, what are their verbal responses, and how are they interacting with peers? Because we still have to think about those social emotional needs, even though we are doing distance learning. Make sure, especially prior to progress monitoring, those times when you have to report the progress to the parents, or when the next IEP is coming up, you need to have one-on-one sessions with that student so that you can be, you know, testing them on the skills that are written within their IEP goals, and make sure that you calendar this time for yourself well in advance of the IEP date. And honestly, a really good practice as a teacher is to just have those one-on-one sessions with your students on a regular basis and have it in your calendar that you're able to have those 15-minute or 20-minute sessions to have it for yourself and know where your students are at with their IEP goals. When I used to teach, I used to have, you have your learning centers, and like once a week, my center was me one-on-one with students for 15 minutes at a time so that I could test them on their goals. So it's just a good way to think strategically when you're planning out your instruction, to have that time with students to consistently track data on goal progress. And then as much as possible, get input from the parents. So there might be online surveys you can do, like Google Forms, or again, making sure that you're having those phone calls, setting up a Google Meet session, or providing them either like a Google form or another email version for them to provide input. And then also you want to make sure that you're still getting some student work samples. So you might be using Google Docs that the student fills in. You might be doing Google Slides, right, where the students can click and move items around in the box. You can also do videos or pictures. Just make sure you have the parent permission for this. And that can be either something that you are collecting, right, when you're online during a Zoom session or a Google Meet session, or it might be something you ask the family to photograph or videotape and then share with you. So your children or the students might be doing work at home. And so you might be asking parents to turn in work at a drop-off or pickup that's happening weekly. Oh, Christina asked a question about using samples from general ed classes. Honestly, I've never heard that we cannot use samples from general ed classes. Do you mean work that the actual student that you're doing did, or do you mean like a comparison? Oh, well, I will say principals can sometimes make up their own rules and say, no, you can't do something. And as long as there's nothing in the law that says that we have to have work samples from every teacher in every class, but I will say it's best practices to have work samples from everywhere. But this principal might be under some kind of a, belief that they don't want that. The only thing that I can think of is if you didn't watch the student do it, or you didn't watch the student actually create that work sample, sometimes it's hard to sit in an IEP meeting and say, here's where they're at, right? Because you didn't see them do it. That's all that I can imagine, because that does seem like an odd thing. And I don't think I ever sat in an IEP meeting where we said that a teacher couldn't show work samples from a gen ed class. So I'm sorry, Christina. The one thing with teaching is we can't always make those decisions, right? Sometimes our principals or our program specialists tell us to do something a certain way, and we just have to do it because they're the boss of that program. So unfortunately, I don't always have the best answer because, individual practices at different districts and different schools vary. Same thing with some of this, right? Some of this you might have been told, like, you're not allowed to use Pear Deck or you're not allowed to use Google surveys. That just can vary from district to district. So the other thing to think about is, what is the learning management system, the LMS, that your district is using? Or do you have any curriculum-based online programs like iReady, Lexia, Accelerated Reading, or Epic? Any of those online programs that students are logging into on their own, completing work, and you can gather data from those to get more information about how or what kind of progress the student is making in different academic content areas. And then Pear Decks also are really easy to use to create small assessments that you can then send out to your students. And it's a really fun website to kind of go through and use. I don't know if anybody's tried Pear Deck, but it's a really user-friendly website. So when you get down to write the actual goals, the different components that you're going to have to include, right, are when all of our goals are annual. So obviously a year from now, the student is going to be given what, right? What are those kind of little, are they going to be given, is it a instructional goal that has to do with technology? Is it paper and pencil? Is it a certain leveled reader? What are those kind of manipulatives or regalia that the student's going to be given? And then what are they going to do with it? How much, how often, and how are you going to measure that progress on it? So we're going to get through a sample in just a second, but you will often hear the acronym SMART goals used. If you ever are interviewing for a job as a teacher and they ask you about, how do you write IEP goals, mention SMART goals because it's a very commonly used acronym. And I'm going to go through into the next couple slides to talk more about this. But the funny thing is, because SMART goals is used so much, there's so many different little, like the words that people use for the SMART. So I included doubles for most of these because it's not a specific set. It really is something that a lot of different descriptions of the SMART are used. I've heard like 3 different versions of the T, but definitely keep in mind all of these small little things because we're going to talk about it here. So what is this specific relevant determination, right? And what we want to talk about is the goal clear and understandable. And something that I learned, decades ago when I did my credential is I remember Dr. Silva, who's not at Cal State Fullerton anymore, but she definitely pounded into us, like, your goal has to be written in such a way that anybody else could pick it up and completely understand what you're asking the student to do, okay? So they're not written just, specific to your classroom, but that they're written in a way that it makes sense to other people. So kind of, make sure to stay away from any, colloquialisms or like slang terms. Make sure that it's positively stated. Does everybody understand? Like, this positively stated means you have to write what the child is going to do. Most commonly, this happens with behavior goals. Sometimes people will write, that so-and-so will not hit, or the child will not spit, right? And we cannot teach a child not to do something, if that makes sense. What you want to is have a goal that the child will engage, right? You want them to participate in the classroom activities in the absence of hitting or in the absence of spitting. So sometimes it's about reducing a certain behavior, but make sure that you're focused on what you want the student to do. Also make sure that the goal has some basis from your present levels. Make sure that it's pertinent to their academics, their social transition needs, and then also that it's relevant to what the child's age is and how many years they have left in school. So if you are teaching high school, obviously transition is a big thing. You have to write goals for a student's transition, whether that's leaving high school to go on to college or secondary institution, or if they're transitioning to an adult program, a day program, they have to have goals that show you have that in mind of what that transition to adulthood is like. And then keep in mind, it's never a good idea to write a goal using a specific product. And the reason is because companies can go out of business, and you don't want to have goals that are limiting in what you're going to work with the student. So while you might have a goal written for a student that says, Jane will use an iPad with Proloquo software to communicate her wants and needs, your goal really should just say an electronic tablet using communication software. So keep in mind that you might have to reference things with those very generic or vague terms. And then when we talk about what is measurable and attainable, what we're looking at is the goal on par with what we expect them to make that progress in, right? Does it help the student condition? Is it behavior-based? Are there standard criteria included? Can this kind of progress be shown in a graph? These are all those things that you want to think about. What is the assessment measure that's going to be used to monitor progress? Has anyone ever heard that phrase, you don't write goals to a test? Have you ever heard this? No, is it just me? Hold on, I'm in the chat. Oh, Christina has, yeah. So we don't write goals to a test, but we write goals to teach skills so that our students will show progress in their assessment tests. So your students should be participating in state testing, and you might have 2 or 3 reading goals and you're working on them all year long. And if your student makes progress and they meet these 3 reading goals, you should see that in the state testing, reading testing scores, right? Like you should see some advancement because your goals should be aligned with that without saying the goal is for Stephanie to improve her score from 500 to 700, right? So you're not writing a goal for them to achieve a certain number on the state testing, but the correlation that we would want to see is, you know, Stephanie met all 3 of her reading goals. And as you can see in her state testing, her reading score improved by 200 points. So that's kind of where that correlation should come together. And then the time sensitive part of it. So will this progress on the goal kind of reach that growth? And will it also help them in the future? And are you looking at that progress enough to make instructional decisions? You might have heard that when we send home our progress reports, right? And a lot of districts use SAIS, SEIS, the Special Education Information System, when you're writing your goals and you're doing your progress reports. And there's those little boxes that you have to check in the progress report that says the student is making progress. And you might have heard that if they're not making progress, you have to hold an IEP meeting. This is something that I have heard, you know, in different districts. Some say yes, some say no, because the reasoning behind it is that if your student is not making progress, then you need to do something differently. Meaning you might have to add different accommodations. You might have to look at the groupings or how much individual time they're getting with you to work on the goals. It's just a case of keeping in mind that if you send home this progress report and the progress report says no progress on goals, no progress on goals, no progress on goals, and then you meet for the annual and you say, oh, they didn't meet the goal. It kind of looks like you didn't keep that in mind throughout the year, that you just kept working on this same goal and they didn't make any progress, and then it feels like you wasted that time. So Christina wrote, if when I'm working or doing a progress report and I find they met that goal, then we hold a new meeting to create new goals. Good, that's good to hear, because yeah, if they met that goal, maybe there's another next step in the skill development that you could work on. But it would also depend right on if they met the annual or if they met the benchmark or the short-term objective, we also sometimes say. The other thing to think about is when you're sending home those progress reports, if you send them home, you know, at the quarters and you say, they're making progress, they're making progress, they're making progress, and then the annual, they didn't meet it. There should be some conversation of why didn't they meet that annual goal? Because throughout the year, the parent's getting progress reports from you saying that they're making progress and they're making progress, right? So it's always one of those important things to kind of keep in mind when we talk about making instructional decisions based on the progress of the goal. So the note here is just about, do you want to continue working on it, change the goal, discontinue the goal? And the thing that I want you to keep in mind is, do you need to change the accommodations or any of the instructional way that you're intervening with the student and the progress that you're expecting of them? So the final thing with writing your goals is, can a parent read and understand that goal? And could another teacher in another school replicate the goal? Because parents move, you know, families move. That's not guaranteed that they're going to live in your district the entire school year. And you want to make sure you set them up for success if they move to another district. So we're going to talk for a minute with just a little sample student, and you guys can read over the information on Kim. So it just talks about she's in 4th grade. She loves music, recess art. She can write 3 to 4 word sentences with correct grammar, capitalization, punctuation. Her math skills are at a 4th grade level. She prefers independent reading time. Her fluency score is 1.3. So that's 1st grade level, 3rd month. And when asked to verbally discuss reading passages in small groups with level readers, she puts her head down, refuses, and shakes her head no. Kim. So, do we need to write a goal for writing? Do you guys think? No thumbs up or thumbs down? No? Scarlett says no. Does anybody think that she would need a writing goal? Betsy says writing goal. Jessica, does anybody want to share some thoughts on why you think yes or?
Well, she can only write 3 to 4 word sentences, and she's a 4th grader, so I think she could do a little more.
Yeah, maybe, you know, I think by 4th grade, they definitely should be writing paragraphs or a single page essay kind of information. So it sounds like Kim doesn't have a problem with her, you know, writing the basics of writing. She just maybe needs to work on writing longer things, right?
Yeah, I think also.
What about math? Does she need a goal for math? No, her math skills are 4th grade level, right? So it's not an area of deficit. And then what about reading? She need a goal for reading? Oh yeah, if she's at 1st grade, 3rd month, we definitely need to work on her reading skills. What about social skills? Does anybody think maybe she should have a goal for social skills? Jessica says yes. Amy says yes. Yeah, because to me, this definitely sounds like she's struggling, right? She likes independent, but she struggles when she's in this group. And even with leveled readers, right? Even with people who are reading passages maybe at the same grade level as her, she's still having a hard time. Is there any other questions that you would want to know about Kim in this present level statement? Can anyone think of another kind of how you would round it out? Like what other information you might want to find out?
If they read it.
Betsy?
I was thinking like they just told us she likes to play at recess, but is she playing by herself? Because again, that helps answer that social answer. Is she engaging in games with others, or is she just by herself?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Is she, you know, a loner when it comes to recess? Like, does she like recess because she can just get outside and walk around by herself? Or is she actually talking to other students? Catherine is asking, would we need to write a comprehensive goal to help her discuss with her peers? That's a good question, right? Because all we can tell is she doesn't like to talk when she's in this small group and they're talking about reading passages. But yeah, there's not more information in the present levels about, is she able to talk with her peers, right? And like Elizabeth is asking, does she have other behaviors? That's a good question too. And it would be like one of those interview questions you'd want to ask the parents, right? You could say, at school, she won't talk with other students in our small group table. Do you notice this at home? Does she talk with siblings or other children in the neighborhood or at family events, right? Those are some of those things you can ask parents. Melissa has a great question. Is she an English learner, right? That should be included in a present level statement. And then Amy was saying we could ask if she is doing reading at home. That's a good question too. You guys are so on the right track. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. This is not a great present level statement, I'll tell you. I wrote it. I know it's not that great. There's a lot of details missing, but I wanted us to have a starting place of how are we going to talk about a sample student like Kim. So here are 2 sample goals that we're going to talk about and see if there's details and why would we write them a certain way. So when it comes to her need to work on her reading skills, right? We know that the problem she's having is, and based on, right, that present level statement, that she's at this 1.3 grade level when it comes to her independent reading skills. Well, we want to make sure that she makes progress on that and that we're able to really track it and show this progress. So the goal that I wrote is for her to improve her independent reading skills to a 2.8 reading level. And the reason I wrote it that way, does anybody have a guess why we would want to go from 1.3 to 2.8 within a year?
Is it because you're trying to get her through a year and a half? I mean, that's kind of the right.
Yeah.
Saying
Yeah,
we're doing
because
more than just recovering 1 year, we're making bigger progress.
exactly, because right, natural progress for any student is that they would advance 1 grade level, right? So we could write the goal like instead of 1.3, she'd go to 2.3, but she's going to be a year older. She's going to be in 5th grade. So we really want to not only make 1 year of continual progress, but advance a little bit, right? This student's going to receive some specialized services. She's going to have really like some instruction from a special education teacher to work on these skills. So of course we would hope that she makes more progress than just natural 1 year, if that makes sense. So obviously when you would write benchmarks out to that, you might have to write it like within this, 3-month period, she's going to make 5 months of progress, or, however you kind of break that down. And then the way that we would show that she's made this progress is because during one-on-one read aloud activities with the teacher on 4 out of 5 opportunities with 100% accuracy using a data tracking sheet. So if you were a teacher and this student moved into your classroom and you got this IEP, you would very quickly realize you need to start doing some small sessions with Kim, right? So that you can get a baseline and see how she's doing, because you're going to have to show that you have marked her progress throughout these opportunities, right? And that on 4 out of 5 opportunities, she's doing it 100% at this reading level. And then there's the foundation if you want, I'm sorry, the CCSS if you want to click on it. And then the other goal, just as a sample that I put here, is for social skills, so that Kim, 1 year from now, Kim will paraphrase information presented during a small group art activity, speaking clearly to her group, utilizing 3 details on 4 to 5 opportunities. Do you know why I put the art specifically in there? Can anybody guess?
She likes it.
Jessica's gonna talk. Wait, oh, I thought she was in.
Is it because she liked art?
Yeah, because art is a preferred activity for her. So this is where you can take like a tiny little detail you know about a student, put it into a goal, and then that's a way for you to know that we're gonna work on her ability to speak in a small group, but it's gonna be on a topic she likes to talk about, right? If a student is struggling in reading, is that the best time of day to expect them to kind of make a lot of growth, right? Like, we got to work on your reading fluency. We got to work on your ability to talk about it and get in this reading group. And we're going to, you know, sometimes it's good to think about, what do you want the student to gain a progress in? And can they do that through a different activity that's going to be more engaging for them, right? That they're going to show some more interest in or feel happy about and really want to participate. And so under our state standards for speaking and listening, there is one about presentation of knowledge and ideas. So that's just where you would get your basis for why you wrote that goal. So when we talk about progress monitoring, one of the things I wanted to say is set yourself up for success. And what I mean by that is, like, don't kill yourself with data tracking measurements that you're not going to be able to sustain. So not every student is going to need one-on-one sessions to work on reading fluency, right? Some of them might be small group sessions, or you might have other ways that you're monitoring their progress. But if you write for all of your students to have 30-minute one-on-one sessions with you to track progress on goals, you're really sticking yourself to a strict schedule. So keep in mind, don't overcommit yourself. Make sure that you're individualizing these for the students, and that you're also making it functional so that you as the teacher can track the progress. So know yourself, know your data collection methods. What do you do effectively? You know, I always loved data tracking sheets. To me, it made the most sense to kind of see how the student was doing and see how they're making progress. Oh, so Catherine is asking about teacher observation, right? Let me go back to this. That's a good question. I didn't jump into that, right? So here at the end of the goal, I wrote that we would do this as measured by teacher observation. And Catherine is asking, right, how do you prove that? Should we still create a data sheet even though that's not what we put into the goal? That is a great question. And I would most likely tell you yes. That even if the goal just says teacher observation, unless you're the kind of teacher that keeps a journal or anecdotal notes where you're documenting, right, how the students are participating in different activities throughout the school day, having a data sheet is the most concrete way to make sure that you're tracking this, especially when the goal says 4 of 5 opportunities, because then you can't just kind of recall off the top of your head. You really should have a way of tracking this across dates or specific activities within your school day. So good question, Catherine. Thank you. Let me go back to the next slide. Melissa, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I have a question because I'm working right now student teaching in Santa Ana Unified, and I've been doing some assessment on progress monitoring and that sort of thing. And I'm so confused about how I assess the goals that are written. For example, this is one student's goal. It was that she will refrain from making silly noises or exaggerated vocals for 70% of her instructional session across 3 out of 5 school days as measured by staff observations and data recordings. And it's like, oh my gosh, what does that exactly mean? And how do I do that? Like when it says refrain from making silly noises for 70% of her instructional session. So I could tally her silly noise, you know, but then,
But
yeah,
then you're tracking frequency, right?
yes,
Yeah. And the goal wasn't written to track frequency.
no. So,
To me, it sounds like not a well-written goal.
yeah,
But again, like you sometimes inherit students, right? And they come with goals and you can't control what you inherit, so to say. So I think the best thing to do is you're just going to have to look at the instructional time that you have with the student. And then it seems to me like they wanted to monitor how much of the time of the, instructional time the student might be making the vocalizations, and do your best judgment to say it's less than 30% of the time.
Okay.
And then the good thing to do is to track that data, because when the student's annual IEP happens, you can say, you know what, the concern was not how much of the time the child was vocalizing, but rather the frequency of how often it's happening. And then that's when you can say you can work on that. But my other question would be, does it matter that the student is vocalizing? We should care more about how much they're engaging in the academic content, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then when they say across 3 out of 5 school days, so that means I would measure it for 5 days and she has to be making it less than 70% of the time for 3 of the 5 days, or,
yes.
You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, it's so confusing when you think about, oh my gosh, exactly what am I measuring here? How do I do it? So
basically, yeah, usually, we do a lot of these like 5 days because there's 5 days in a school week. And then I guess it would tell you that if the student does it the first, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then you don't really have to track the progress on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, unless you want that progress to show for when you write your baseline for the next year. Yeah.
Perfect. So,
Catherine, Catherine jumped in the chat to say, right, we want to write the goal for what she would be doing, right?
Exactly.
What is the actual academic behavior you want to see? Or like she's saying, or teacher replacement behavior. So if the student, and that goes back to what's the function of the behavior? Why is the student doing these vocalizations? Is it to get your attention? And how can we teach the student to get attention in an appropriate, like,
exactly. That's a really good point too. So yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Melissa.
So
the other notes that I have here about progress monitoring is to make sure that your classroom staff knows what your students' goals are. Because when we get to the end of the school year, or when you're at your reporting dates throughout the school year, the child's annual IEP, you want to get the input from the paraeducators or instructional assistants. So make sure they know what the students are working on. Now, you might have a district that says you can't give a copy of IEP goals to any of your paras. I know some districts say that. I don't know why, because I feel like we're a team and our paras should know what we're working on. But in the event that they do, you can still give your paraeducators a summary, right? This student is working on not interrupting, or this student is working on fluency, or Kim is working on speaking more in a group. So there are, summaries that you can give. So at least they have a general idea of what you're really looking at when it comes to your students' participation in class. And then also to have regular team meetings. So when you're teaching, you're going to have a speech therapist or an occupational therapist that you're working with, maybe a behavior specialist like an ABA or an autism program manager. Have regular, lunch meetings with them, even if it's once every other week or once a month, where you sit and have lunch together and you talk about the students, because that's how you'll keep current and know that you guys are seeing the same kind of things across settings. So it's just really important to, be a team and really be up to date on what other people are seeing, and also checking in with parents. So if you send home that progress report, it's okay to call them a week later and say, hey, did you have a chance to read it over? Did you have any questions? If anything, it just shows the parents how much you care, right, about how their student's doing, and that matters. And then this is another question that comes up a lot, and you may not have seen it yet, but I promise you, you will see this at some point in your career. And the question is, do we repeat the same goal if the student didn't meet it? And I will tell you that I have heard administrators across districts, and some say, yes, you do, and some say, no, you don't. So in my best judgment, based on my consistent reading of all of these OAH, the way that the ALJ judges rule on these cases is you need to follow some detailed questions. And these are the questions you need to think about. So how many years has that goal been worked on? Have you been doing different intervention strategies or methods? Have you worked on, is this a skill that the student has to acquire? Or is it something that can be met via an accommodation? So an example of that is, 10 years ago, or maybe it was 15 years ago, when the Common Core state standards came out, everyone was really shocked that spelling was not in there, right? Spelling is not in our state standards. So students do not need to meet certain spelling tests to advance to the next grade level, right? And trust me, it's frustrating for me as a parent when my kid has to take a spelling test every week, and I'm like, it doesn't matter. And the reason why is because there's so much prediction software out there. Everything that we know about children's development of writing skills, you hinder that development when you're constantly telling them that they wrote a word wrong, because they get really self-conscious of writing paragraphs or stories or their thoughts out when they keep thinking they're spelling a word wrong. So there's a lot of theory and research behind why spelling doesn't matter, but you're going to have a parent that says, I want to go for spelling. It's inevitable. And I think it's important to have these kind of conversations as an IEP team to say, I realize that the student is delayed or their spelling skills appear to be a deficit, but we know that there's no state standard for this. And as a professional, the more important issue is to work on their composition or the length of their writing, as opposed to spelling words right. So there's, and you might have a student that moves in from another state and they have a spelling goal, or maybe the teacher added one because the parent was really adamant about spelling. In any case, just keep in mind, is it something that can be met a different way? And does it not need to be something the student has to work on? So again, and also checking in, right? Number 4 down here, checking in on how the parents feel about repeating that goal. And do the other members in the team have thoughts about this? So the main thing to keep in mind is you don't dismiss this unmet goal without conversation with the IEP team that's documented in that IEP notes page. So if you mention that there's a goal that was not met, you then need to have a conversation of, I have dropped the goal because I've had conversations with the parents, I've had conversations with our, other specialists, that this is what, we're considering by dropping this goal. Or if you do repeat the goal, it should not be verbatim. Do not ever repeat a goal verbatim without adding in any kind of additional supports or prompting, or in some way modify how the student's going to demonstrate the skill. So my 2 kind of nuggets to definitely don't forget. Thanks, Christina. Elizabeth is asking, you had an IEP and wanted to keep the same goal. You did end up rewriting them, right? And that's okay, as long as you kept in mind kind of changing, how the student is going to achieve the goal. Maybe you modified the prompting level. Maybe you added, maybe you added a sentence strip to the way that you're going to, intervene for the child. But definitely don't let it stay verbatim. That's the main thing. So at the end here are just some sources if you want to see more information of where I got some of the information. And my email, if you ever want to email and ask a simple question, feel free to jump in anytime. I'm here always. I added my little Cal State Fullerton pennant. If you guys, I didn't have this last semester, so I'm pretty excited to have it on the wall behind me. It's so small though. Does anybody have any questions? And hang on, because we have a survey for you, so don't leave yet, please.
All right, well, thank you so much. That was so valuable. And we do have a survey. I'm going to post it in the chat box and beg you to please take it. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this just helps ensure that we continue getting funding so that we can continue to offer these opportunities to you. So I'll type that in the chat box. And then you can go ahead and head over to there now. And I'll go ahead and while you're doing that and just tell you the next webinar is also with Professor Taberski. She's going to take it to the next level with IEPs, and she's going to talk about successful IEP meetings and just some of the issues that can pop up with the virtual options that we have now. So really how to set yourself and the school team, the family, and your student up for success. So more on IEP meetings. That's going to be March 9th at 4 p.m. And you can register that at the same link that I have been sending out. So thank you so much once again. And please take that survey. Thanks, guys.
I'll jump back in and answer Catherine.